Okay, this video is for modules 20/21. I say that because remember that I don't really like the order that your book goes in with fiscal policy, and so I kind of made my own logical order. So some of this will be 20, some of it will be 21. But okay, so generally problems with fiscal policy is what we have to start with. So first of all, the big problem that your book did talk about was time lags. Part of this, the problem with time lags is that it takes time to realize that there is a problem that is out there in the economy. The reason for this is that, for example, if we're talking about a recession, okay, it takes several quarters in a row of a downward trend for anybody to recognize and say, yep, this is a recession, yep, this is a problem, we need to deal with it. So it takes time for that to happen, for them to say, oh, wait, we're in a recession, bad. And then it takes another bunch of time to be able to develop some sort of plan. Part of that problem is these guys. Within Congress, you have obviously different ideologies as far as what we should do, how much should we do to be able to fix the economy. And so sometimes it also unfortunately comes down to politics. So for example, somebody was asking me about the part in your book that talked about the 2008 stimulus check, and they said, well, okay, I don't understand. Why would they choose to do a stimulus check when they know that it's not going to be as much of an impact on the economy as just straight up government spending would be? And I said, well, part of the problem is that that was 2008 when we were talking about an election year, and there was a lot of controversial things going on, and nobody wants to be blamed for the economy of all things, especially in an election year. So that also delays plans. And then lastly, time for changes to occur. That takes a while as well. I don't know about you, but whenever I get a check, it usually sits on my counter at home for a while before I'll get around to actually depositing it in the bank. And then even after it gets deposited in the bank, it may take me some time to actually go and realize, oh yeah, what do I want to spend that on, right? So that's one of the big problems with fiscal policy. Now, one of the things that your book did not talk about is something called the crowding out effect. And the crowding out effect is this idea that when we have increased government spending, it's going to lead to some decreases in private spending as well. And the reason that is because some of you started to recognize this, and when we started talking about fiscal policy, you said, wait a minute, so you're telling me that they're going to increase spending and they're going to cut taxes? How is that possible? Well, yeah, in some cases they do increase taxes a bit to be able to afford increased government spending. But what else can they do if they're not going to increase taxes? So one other thing they could do is they could sell bonds. So bonds are basically loans to the government. Or they could borrow money from the financial sector. Either way, what happens is that the government's basically pulling out some of this money out of circulation. They're increasing the demand for money as a whole. And when that happens, they're putting pressure on the interest rate. And so they're driving up the interest rate. And if they're driving up the interest rate because of all of their spending, that doesn't mean that we're going to get charged as consumers anything less. And so what happens is that the interest rate goes up as a whole, and so consumer spending goes down. So I have a couple of things to point this out. One, this kind of cartoon, and this is obviously depicting President Obama, but I don't care what president you put in there. This is what happens is that basically this guy over here is representing, it says private sector jobs, and President Obama is making government jobs. Oh yeah, no way. But in order to do that, he's having to take from the private sector. And like I said, is that I don't care what president you put in there. Anytime you try and make jobs in the government, it's going to take jobs away from the private sector. So that is true. I don't care if you're talking about Republican or Democrat. Okay. The other part, like I said, is it does put pressure on the interest rate to increase because there's an increased demand for money, so it's going to drive up interest rates. And so as a result, consumers are going to say, oh boy, it's costing me more to get a loan. I ain't going to get a loan. So it's actually going to cause private borrowing to decrease. And so this is the crowding out effect, where some of this money goes towards more towards the government, and so private spending doesn't happen very much. All right, the third problem is this idea of supply shocks and dealing with supply shocks. And this was something that your book did talk about, is that supply shocks are hard because the government can't shift the aggregate supply curve. And so since they can't shift the aggregate supply curve, the only one that we shift with fiscal policy is aggregate demand. Well, you shift the aggregate demand curve and you're going to have problems as well. So shifting the aggregate demand curve only makes matters worse. And here's a case in point. So I got a special kind of torture here. We have the negative supply shock, i.e. we have a left shift in our short run aggregate supply curve. Maybe, for example, commodity prices have gone up. Okay? So here's why this is a special kind of torture. Because here is our potential output. So that's our YP. This is where we want to be. That's our natural rate of unemployment. That's us being at our full potential. But this is where we actually are. Okay, great. So what kind of gap is that? Hopefully you said recessionary. Okay, because our short run equilibrium is less than our long run equilibrium. So this is going to be a recessionary gap. But here's the problem with this, is that not only do we have a recessionary gap, so we have high unemployment. So look at that. We have, this is our natural rate, and obviously unemployment is going to be worse than that. So our unemployment rate is going to be worse. But also look at the difference in price levels from here to here. So not only do we have high unemployment, but we also have high inflation. And so this is what we call stagflation. So, okay, what do we do about this? The government gets yelled at, saying, do something. I don't have a job, and it's costing me more to go to the store for groceries. Do something about it. Okay, fine. Let's do something about it. The fiscal policy, we get involved in, maybe, for example, we have expansionary fiscal policy. So that moves the aggregate demand curve to the right. Remember, we can't move the short-run aggregate supply curve. So we move the things to the right. Well, look at that. We're back at long-run equilibrium. That's awesome. However, we got rid of our problem of unemployment, but look what happened to our prices. Our prices went back up. And so now we have even more inflation. So that's not a good thing. So what if we do the opposite? What if we have some contractionary fiscal policy? So contractionary fiscal policy, we're going to move our aggregate demand curve to the left. Okay, so maybe we decrease the government spending or we increase taxes. Okay, great. But now the problem is that we solved the problem of inflation. Yay, prices went down. However, look at what happened to unemployment. We're getting further away from our full GDP. So now we have more unemployment. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Because moving the aggregate demand curve will solve one problem, but only make the other problem worse. So it's just kind of a hard deal around. So this is part of the problem with fiscal policy, but generally speaking, it's a problem with supply shocks as a whole. There's really no right answer to solving a supply shock. Okay, so that's the problems with fiscal policy. I think I'm going to actually stop here, and in the next video I will talk about the multiplier in fiscal policy.